Chapter 15, Lillimont Lake. Malfoy Manor stood as a grand 17th-century estate, marked by its imposing wrought iron front gate. The grounds were fortified with anti-intruder wards, extending deep underground and forming a secure barrier overhead. Now that the estate had come under the Lestrange's control by magical law, Hermione understood that sneaking past those wards was out of the question. Not even for Draco. The front gate was their only route, and in the days following their visit to Rita Skeeter, they dedicated every waking hour to devising a plan to breach it. The Daily Prophet had published an extensive and colorful feature on the upcoming Christmas gala, which they had managed to snag from a poorly concealed wizarding home across Godric's Hollow. The article revealed that the ministry was hiring nearly 24 companies for the event, all of them pure-blood-owned, of course. Among them was a private security firm known as the Greengrass Guard. Draco had painted a vivid picture of Eleanor Greengrass, strict, ruthless, and uncompromising. There was no room for hope that the front gates would be anything less than vigilant. But, Draco said one afternoon as they sprawled on the library floor, intently studying the diagram he had painstakingly recreated of the manor, "The gates are 15 feet wide, and we have the invisibility cloak." "Yeah," Harry replied, "but Snape has probably told the Death Eaters about the cloak by now." Hermione let out a frustrated sigh. "If that's the case, I'm sure they'll place a semi-permeability charm on the entrance. If you haven't been granted express permission to enter, you'll be immobilized the moment you try." A heavy silence fell over them as Hermione's gaze drifted to Draco. His hand rested on the diagram, his expression a mix of conflict and uncertainty. She tried to imagine how she would feel if her childhood home had been transformed into a sanctuary for Death Eaters. But that wasn't quite right. The manor had always served the Death Eater's agenda. He was the one who'd. Hermione wanted to ask him about it, but she knew that in front of Harry, Draco would just deflect. She could almost hear his casual drawl. "Yeah, I really miss the place where the Dark Lord promised to murder me. So many happy memories." With a sigh, Draco pushed the diagram away and leaned back against the sofa, crossing his long legs at the ankles. The neck of his dark green jumper stretched, revealing the weathered edge of the scar from the ministry. He absent-mindedly thumbed a strand of hair away from his forehead. Hermione forced herself to look elsewhere. She had hoped this feeling would fade after Halloween, but 10 days had passed, and she still found herself noticing him. Whether it was at breakfast, when he tapped a finger thoughtfully on the back of his fork, or during their brainstorming sessions, where he wrote notes in a quick, fluid hand, he was impossible to ignore. Even when he came within 3 feet of her, memories flooded back, the warmth of his flushed cheek, the shape of his cheekbone, the hard line of his jaw. She was certain he had caught her staring, too. Sometimes, it felt as if he noticed her just as she noticed him. She stared blankly at the parchment in front of her, and without even blinking, she could visualize Draco's expression from Halloween, cautious and vulnerable. In that moment, it felt like she could have done anything, and he would have simply watched. Even his features, usually as sharp as blades, had softened with uncertainty. "Focus," she reminded herself. "I really think," she said, perhaps too loudly, "our only option is disguise and infiltration." To emphasize her point, she laid another excerpt from the Prophet atop their notes. The clipping was a hiring advertisement from the gala's caterers, Lizzie Spisworth's finest feasts and magical mixologists. It read, "Now interviewing service workers for a prestigious single event at high pay. Only exceptionally professional and experienced candidates will be considered. Confident use of culinary. Charms, balancing enchantments, and anti-spelling spells are a must," Hermione announced, tapping the ad. "If we're working as service staff, we'll be able to move freely among the guests." Draco replied, "If we're using disguises, why not just be the guests?" "Because then we'd have to deal with the guest list, obviously," she shot back, giving him an unimpressed look. "You just don't want to serve people off those silver platters you took for granted growing up." "Granger," he said, placing a hand over his heart, "this mention of my wealth and status wounds me deeply." Both she and Harry snorted, and Draco looked quite pleased with himself. "It's not just that," he continued. "Guests will have more access to Umbridge. She's on high alert for traitors, even within the ministry, so an aura will likely be guarding her at all times. A bathroom or powder room might be the only place they'd leave her alone." "What?" Harry interjected. "Service staff can't use the toilet now. Please, Potter. They won't be using the same bathrooms as the guests. They'll go to the East Wing." Harry and Hermione exchanged glances, and Hermione pressed her lips together, fighting back a grin. "Ah, the East Wing," Harry said in his poshest voice. "I do declare," Hermione added. "I'll take supper on the veranda of the East Wing from now on." Draco raised a thin, pale eyebrow at them, looking rather annoyed. "Are you done?" "I mean," Harry said, "probably not." Hermione let out a helpless giggle before clearing her throat. "Anyway, the biggest question still remains. How will we disguise ourselves? Transfiguration is too vulnerable to counter spells, and the Ministry is on the lookout for polyjuice use. Maybe a glamour charm? But I doubt they'd be powerful enough." A pensive silence settled over the group. After a full minute, Harry stretched, and Hermione heard his back crack. "We'll have the sword by then," he said. "What if we just... Are we really going to slash our way through the gate?" he asked casually, but Hermione could hear the anticipation in his voice. In just 5 days, they would meet the Order's messenger at Lillimont Lake and finally receive the Sword of Gryffindor. But Hermione knew Harry's excitement was about more than just the sword. He was also hoping for Ron's return. That thought made her uneasy. It had been nearly a month since Ron had left, and there had been no word from him. Each time she thought of him, a pang of anxiety shot through her. The fear that something might have happened to him was overwhelming, especially since they were powerless to help if something had gone wrong. Her feelings were complicated, too. Whenever she thought of Ron, who might still have feelings for her, who had stormed out because of those feelings, her mind wandered back to Halloween with Draco. A wave of guilt washed over her. She had been more flirtatious that night than she'd ever dared to be with anyone. And even though Draco had been quite drunk, he had flirted back. She remembered that idle smile when he had challenged her to cut his hair, just like Pansy once had. "Do it, then Granger," he had teased. Hermione shuffled some papers, feeling her cheeks flush. It was irrational to feel guilty. She had told Ron that she didn't love him anymore, that a relationship between them was impossible. She was allowed to find other people attractive, wasn't she? Besides, nothing had really happened with Draco. Sure, there had been that haircut dare, but it was just one drunken touch. Well, maybe two if she counted the moment she had pressed her palm to his shoulder blade to guide him into the hall. And then there was the time she had stumbled into the bathtub, and he had instinctively caught her forearm, holding on just a moment too long. But deep down, she knew how much Ron would have loathed the thought of her attraction to Draco Malfoy. It wasn't just Ron. During their time at the Burrow in July, hadn't it been a constant and enthusiastic topic of discussion? Whenever the Malfoys were out of sight, Hermione couldn't help but dwell on how detestable they were, cowardly, arrogant, and downright evil. "I don't know how you let them sleep in your house, Hermione," Ginny had said, her disgust palpable. "If it were up to me..." She shot a look of such intense loathing at Lucius Malfoy that Hermione felt it like a rush of heat from an open oven door. But Draco wasn't his father. He was different, substantially so. For the past week and a half, Hermione had felt as though she were arguing with a Greek chorus in her mind, trying to convince a host of imaginary critics that she knew him, perhaps better than anyone else in the world did. And the truth was, she liked what she knew. She appreciated how protective he was of his parents and friends, how sensitive and private he was about their shared lives. Draco was genuinely witty, just as he had claimed, and when he made his clever remarks, he would glance at her as if seeking her approval. She valued his attentiveness to the nuances of human interaction, something that Harry, Ron, and even Ginny often overlooked. Unlike her other friends, Draco understood that sometimes a silence wasn't just a silence, a glance wasn't merely a glance, and people could feel a dozen emotions all at once. That sensitivity did make him defensive, but she also liked that she knew how to navigate around those defenses. She enjoyed how he reflected on the past, savoring it like a bittersweet memory. And she admired that he was trying to do the right thing. Now she glanced over at him. Draco's attention was back on the diagram he had drawn. At the top, he had written Malfoy Manor in extravagant, looping capitals. He had even doodled a peacock on the hills of the grounds, though it looked more like a turkey. It was almost sweet, in a way. She looked down at her notes and tried, for the 100th time that week, to focus. They still hadn't made any breakthroughs about Christmas. In the days leading up to the 15th, the conversations seemed to revolve endlessly around the wand that the Dark Lord was pursuing. Draco was growing weary of it all. Meals had become a battleground of sorts, with Potter relentlessly trying to convince Hermione of the wand's significance. Hermione, however, always countered that even if a wand with extraordinary powers did exist, it hadn't been enough to keep Grindelwald in power, so why should they be concerned? On the night they were set to travel to Lillimont Lake, they found themselves wide awake, waiting for the clock to strike 1:45 a.m. so they could disapparate. They were in Hermione's room, where Potter was busy steaming laundry with the tip of his wand. Draco was attempting to recline in a rather uncomfortable, creaky chair in the corner, while Hermione lay on her bed, wearing the orange jumper she had donned for Halloween along with dark muggle jeans. For some reason, Draco kept stealing glances at her. The fabric was so unusual, the way it flowed and clung to her legs, accentuating the curves of her calves. The debate about the wand continued between her and Potter. After a while, Draco picked up their translation of Beetle the Bard from the end table and idly flipped to the triangular mark. Suddenly, an idea struck him. He stared down at the tale of the three brothers, realizing with a jolt that he and Hermione had overlooked something crucial. They had been so engrossed in Grindelwald's history, viewing the book merely as a clever hiding spot for something resembling a rune, that they had missed the bigger picture. "Potter," he said, interrupting their discussion, "have you actually read the story? The one Dumbledore marked?" Potter halted mid-sentence, his wand hovering over a pair of half-dry trousers. "Well, no," he admitted, pushing his glasses up with a knuckle. "But I still—" "There's a wand in it," Draco interrupted, "one with more power than the others." Potter dropped both the trousers and his wand, staring at Draco in disbelief. For a moment, he was speechless. Then, realization washed over his face. Turned to Hermione, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "And you didn't think to mention that?" "Harry, it's just a fairy tale," Hermione replied, her impatience evident as she sat up on the bed. "It's about three brothers meeting death. The wand in the story is supposedly Death's own magic wand. It's not real." But Potter was already striding across the room, snatching the translation from Draco's hands. He read it with such speed that his eyes blurred. After a moment, he began to read aloud, his voice starting off indistinct but growing stronger with excitement. "So the oldest brother, who was a combative man, asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence. A wand that must always win duels for its owner. A wand worthy of a wizard who had conquered death." Potter looked up, his mouth hanging open. "This is it," he breathed. "This is what Voldemort's looking for. This?" He quickly scanned the page again. "This Elder Wand, a wand that can win any duel. For the leader of the Death Eaters, a wand that can conquer death." "Harry," Hermione interjected, her voice dripping with exasperation, "Grindelwald couldn't have had a wand that could win any duel when he famously lost to Dumbledore." "But the brother in the story loses the wand," Draco chimed in, suddenly eager to join the debate. "He gets reckless, brags about it in some inn, and ends up murdered in his sleep. Someone could have stolen it from Grindelwald at some point. By the time he dueled Dumbledore, he might have been using a regular wand again." Hermione narrowed her eyes into slits, skepticism radiating from her gaze. Draco couldn't help but smirk. That look had become all too familiar. "Well," she said, "I think this is all highly circumstantial." "Hermione," Harry interrupted, "you're forgetting something." "Oh, am I? And what's that?" "Voldemort has Ollivander, knows more about wands than anyone in Britain, and he was tortured and interrogated. If the Elder Wand were just a myth, he would have told Voldemort. Clearly, Voldemort must have heard about it, and Ollivander's confirmation is why he set off to find it." Hermione opened her mouth to respond, but after a long silence, she slowly closed it again. For the first time in 5 days and just as many debates, uncertainty flickered across her face. Draco couldn't help but feel a bit amused. It was just like her to believe in something extraordinary only when it was backed by Britain's foremost expert. Honestly, she could be so rigid, especially for someone who'd only been introduced to the concept of magic halfway through her life. He glanced back at the translation in Harry's hands, his amusement fading into temptation. An unbeatable wand. Draco found himself imagining the look on the Death Eaters' faces if he could outduel them all at 17. He could finally prove his worth to Crabbe's father. And if he had wielded a wand like that last year, things would have turned out very differently for him. "Still," Hermione said finally, "I don't know if this changes much." Harry let out a disbelieving laugh. "How can you say that?" Hermione regained her composure. "Look, maybe you're right. Let's assume this mark is indeed a sign of the Elder Wand. I'll concede that it would explain why Dumbledore left it for us. He wanted to warn us that we'd face greater danger if Voldemort found the wand." She took a deep breath. "But Dumbledore didn't tell us to pursue it. What he explicitly instructed us to do was track down and destroy the Horcruxes. Besides, Voldemort can already defeat nearly anyone in a duel. Will this wand really make him that much more powerful? And, she added quickly, as Harry seemed ready to interject, don't forget, we're heading to the Lake Inn. She glanced at the clock. In an hour, and then we'll have the... That's a significant step, Draco remarked about the sword. Harry hesitated, lost in thought. Come on, Harry, Hermione urged, her voice filled with determination. Think of the locket. We're making real progress. We can't stop now. After a long pause, Draco added, she's right, Potter. Harry turned to Draco, surprised. I would have thought you'd want the wand. Of course I would, Draco admitted. But I also don't want to cross paths with the Dark Lord on his quest. Besides, let's say we somehow break into Nurmengard and manage to get Grindelwald to tell us who stole the wand. What then? It's been decades. The wand could have changed hands a dozen times. Exactly, Hermione agreed, casting a grateful glance at Draco. I'm not saying it's completely unimportant. Look, if we find and destroy all the Horcruxes, and Voldemort still hasn't realized he's chasing Grindelwald, then, sure, let's go after the wand before he does. But until then, we really need to stay focused. Harry sighed, feeling defeated. Fine, you too. I'm going to make a cup of tea. Draco listened as Harry's footsteps faded down the hall, his words echoing strangely. You too, he had said, glancing between Draco and Hermione as if they were a team. Draco found he enjoyed that notion. Why not? He thought with satisfaction, settling back into the uncomfortable chair. He and Hermione had great judgment when they worked together. They had outsmarted Aurors and Death Eaters to escape from the Ministry of Magic, starting without so much as a wand. They had even outmaneuvered the Dark Lord's soul in the diadem, allowing her to learn the Fidelius charm and escape unscathed. Clearly, they made an effective team. Draco looked over at Hermione, who had reclined on her bed with a sigh. Her hair fanned out around her head, illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the blinds. Something warmed in his chest. It had been a while since they had stayed up so late, not since Halloween. A light frown settled on his brow as he watched her. Draco's mind was a whirlwind. It had been 2 weeks since that night, and with each passing day, the details faded into a drunken haze. Yet some memories remained vivid, the smoothness of her arm, the way her hair cascaded and shifted, and the tentative brush of her fingertips, as if it had all happened just moments ago. Hermione, he called softly. She replied, turning onto her side on the bed. He opened his mouth, but words eluded him. He had uttered her name without a purpose, simply to draw her gaze. For a moment, he simply studied her, bathed in moonlight, tugging at the sleeve of her lumpy orange jumper. Her rounded shoulders spoke of countless hours spent in study, and her muggle jeans were faded at the thighs. She looked soft, like snow or cotton, sitting there, sober and with broken springs digging into his back. Draco couldn't shake the thought of how he could have kissed her that Halloween. He hadn't allowed himself to think about it then, and in the weeks that followed, he had always stopped the idea before it could fully form, always hesitating, always deferring. But now the memory crashed over him, unstoppable. He was back in that bathroom, rising to his feet, half blind with drink and sensitive as a nerve ending. She was flushed and tentative, and he was sliding his hand around her waist, into the dip of her lower back, pulling her closer, kissing her. What? Hermione asked, a hint of self-consciousness creeping into her voice, a small smile playing on her lips. Draco felt a rush of heat flood his cheeks, mortified, and quickly looked away. Nothing. His heartbeat quickened, shallow and erratic. He felt dazed, as if he were grappling with disbelief. God, he thought. God, what an idiot he was. The past 2 weeks hadn't just been a claustrophobic experience at headquarters. It was glaringly obvious now, almost foolishly so, the way he had been attuned to her words, her looks, her movements, and how he had tried so hard not to notice. Of course, he had to try. Hermione Granger was everything he was supposed to avoid. Righteous, combative, messy. So earnest it was almost painful. She was always striving, her passion evident in every gesture. The quintessential Gryffindor, a Muggle-born. Yet, even as these thoughts swirled in his mind, a torrent of questions surged forth, relentless. Would she have tasted like fire whiskey or sugar? What would she have done if he had kissed her? Would she freeze in shock or respond with the same fervor she displayed in everything else? The very idea of her leaning into him sent his stomach plummeting. Draco's mind went completely blank. Thanks for backing me up, Hermione said, breaking the silence. Before? What? He glanced at the pile of laundry where Potter had been standing. Oh, right. Yeah. He struggled to find something, anything worth saying. Have you always been like that? He blurted out. his thoughts drifting back to her animated gestures as she argued with Potter, her cheeks flushed, her voice filled with passion. This distraction was doing nothing to help him. Now he was imagining crossing the room, stopping at the end of her bed, leaning down, and watching that brilliant color rise in her cheeks. Kissing her right here, right now. Have I always been like what? She asked, her brow furrowing slightly. So certain about everything, he managed to reply. Oh, she looked taken aback. Well, I'm not certain about everything, you know that. She glanced at him with a conspiratorial look, and Draco felt a warmth blooming inside his chest, as if she had pressed a thumbprint there. Yes, he did know. Despite her headstrong demeanor, he was acutely aware of her vulnerabilities, the moments when she faltered. But I've always been opinionated, yes, she continued, a smile playing on her lips. My parents loved to tell everyone about the time I researched the NHS's dentistry policy when I was 8 and presented a comprehensive reform plan at dinner. NHS, he repeated, his curiosity piqued. Oh, her smile faltered for just a moment. It's the Muggle National Health Service. Once again, Draco felt that strange, traitorous curiosity surge within him, more powerful than before. Real questions began to form, not just vague feelings, stacking on top of one another. He wanted to know if this NHS was better or worse than ST. Mungo's, which had been understaffed and mismanaged for years, decades, as his mother often lamented. He was also curious about how dentistry was supposed to work in the Muggle world. Yet, he felt his posture stiffening, awkwardness creeping in, and his father's disapproving voice echoed in the back of his mind. Muggles, it sneered with distant disgust. Draco found himself staring at the floor, his face tense and something churning in his stomach. What would his parents think of him wanting to kiss Hermione? What about his friends? His entire family? The thought of their reactions was suffocating. He could still hear the things they had called his Aunt Andromeda. Filthy Muggle lover, Bellatrix's voice rang out, as if their father would die of shame. And then his mother's cool, dismissive tone. A blood traitor like that is no sister of mine. Draco imagined Pansy's disbelieving laugh, the look of repulsion on Crabbe and Goyle's faces, and the jeering disdain from Blaise and Theo. He tried to clear his mind, but it was no use. He didn't want to feel this curiosity, yet he also didn't want the echoes of his family's judgments. He wanted nothing more than to be alone, to silence the voices in his head and think clearly, even for just 2 bloody seconds. His mind felt like it was under pressure. Think of something else, he urged himself. Anything else? He closed his eyes, picturing her fingertips on his cheek, her curious face reflected in the mirror. In that moment, everything else faded away, leaving his mind blissfully blank. The complexities of life, filled with fear and judgment, dissolved. That night had been simple, private, and elemental. The drink had taken them beyond choice or responsibility. I'm going to check on Harry and the tea, Hermione said, her voice carrying an unusual note. Draco opened his eyes, but she was already moving across the room. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving him alone with his thoughts. By the time they apparat to Lillimont Lake, he still hadn't fully processed everything that had happened. The crisp air smelled of frost, and the moon hung like a white sickle in the sky. Draco felt a sense of relief to be out in the cold, grateful for the distraction. The lake was small, hardly larger than the garden behind the cottage. Hello, Potter called out, stepping onto the pebbled bank with his wand at the ready. White mist puffed from his mouth as he spoke. It hadn't been nearly cold enough to see their breath back at headquarters. Clearly, the apparition had taken them to the far reaches of Scotland. Draco lingered in the trees with Hermione, both of them with wands drawn. They didn't really expect an ambush, not after receiving the will and bequests from their mysterious messenger. Still, it was wise to be cautious. Draco was cloaked under the invisibility cloak, though his wand hand peeked out from its folds. Hermione stood close to a pine tree, her hand pressed against the rough bark. She hadn't spoken to him since they were in her room, and he couldn't help but wonder if something in his expression had given away his thoughts. With a mix of embarrassment and curiosity, he pondered if she had sensed his feelings before he had even acknowledged them himself. Suddenly, a movement ahead jolted him from his reverie. His wand shot up instinctively, ready for action. But it wasn't an attack. In fact, it wasn't even a person. Before them, at the edge of the lake where the still water had frozen into the pebbles, a Patronus materialized. A stunning doe, shimmering silver, its reflection dancing on the icy surface. For the first time in what felt like ages, thoughts of himself and Hermione slipped away. Draco was entranced by the sight, and it seemed Potter was equally captivated. After a long moment, Potter took a tentative step toward the doe, his wand hand wavering. The doe stood there, ethereal and majestic, as if waiting for them. Stepped away, pausing occasionally to allow Potter to keep up, guiding him around the edge of the lake. Draco and Hermione followed closely behind, moving quietly through the trees. When Potter reached a small bluff that overlooked a deeper section of the lake, the doe stepped gracefully onto the water's surface. Potter hesitated, clearly uncertain about how to proceed, but the doe didn't venture far. She paused, bowing her head until the tip of her nose brushed against the thin, dark ice. There, she lingered for several long, still moments, before vanishing completely. Potter stared at the water where the doe had touched, lowering his wand. "What's he doing?" Draco murmured. Hermione shrugged, remaining silent. As Draco watched the back of her head, an odd prickle of worry crept over him. Then Potter called out in a low, urgent whisper, "The sword. They've left it here." Suddenly Potter spun around. Draco and Hermione quickly raised their wands again, their hearts racing. He was facing a cluster of trees about 20 feet away. "Hello?" Potter called again. "Is someone there? Remus? Tonks? Kingsley? Lumos?" The beam of light pierced the darkness, sweeping across the lake's edge and into the trees. Yet, despite squinting, Potter didn't seem to see anything. They didn't hear the telltale crack of disapparition either. "Look," Potter said, throwing caution to the wind. "If you're in the order, come out, would you?" The wind rustled through the trees, producing a forlorn sound. Hermione tensed, as if a sudden idea had struck her. "Harry," she whispered, stepping out from the tree line. Potter shot her a concerned glance. This wasn't part of the plan, but Draco wasn't worried. If they were facing an enemy, he felt certain they would have already attacked. Draco moved out from the shadows of the trees, still cloaked, and stopped beside Hermione and Potter at the water's edge. He gazed down into the dark, icy depths below. The water shimmered, revealing the unmistakable glint of the ruby-encrusted hilt of Godric Gryffindor's sword. "Harry," Hermione whispered, her voice low, "what if this is someone from the Ministry who's secretly sympathetic to the Order? Maybe that's how they got their hands on Dumbledore's bequests. They must want to stay hidden, so we can't reveal them if we get caught." Potter furrowed his brow. "Could be," he replied quietly. After a moment's contemplation, he raised his voice again. "Whoever you are, if you can get a message to any member of the Order of the Phoenix, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, Kingsley Shacklebolt, or anyone else on our side, tell them to meet us here. Let's say December 1st at 11 p.m. That should give you enough time to spread the word." He finally lowered his wand. "Thank you. For the sword, and well, for everything." A long silence followed. Then, from the trees, a sudden crack echoed. The mysterious figure was gone. With a determined expression, Potter turned back to the icy lake. The sword rested on the kitchen table, pristine and untouched by the passage of time, alongside the diadem. Harry sat wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea cradled in his hands, his hair still damp from the lake. Hermione faced away from Draco, her mind swirling with thoughts so intense they felt almost painful. She longed for a pensive. "Who do you think it was?" Harry asked. "Can you think of anyone with a doe Patronus?" Hermione shook her head. She had gone through the entire list of Order members in Dumbledore's army. None of them had a doe. "Whoever it is," Draco said as he joined them, "why didn't you tell them to contact the Weasleys? Or Hagrid or McGonagall? They're the only ones in the Order who are still out in the open." "That's why I didn't mention them," Harry said. "If this person gets caught, we don't want them giving away everyone else's identities." "Yeah, but why would they be any better at finding those on the run than we are?" Harry threw up his hands in exasperation. "I don't know, okay? It's just a chance we have to take. We need to seize every opportunity we can." Their focus shifted back to the objects on the table. For the first time since her conversation with Draco in her room, Hermione's thoughts sharpened, filled with tense excitement that seemed to electrify the air around them. At last, they had not just a Horcrux, but also the means to destroy it. "Do you think I'll be able to feel it?" Harry asked quietly. "When we finally get rid of it." "None of the books on Horcruxes went into that much detail," Hermione replied. "But I don't think so. It's been completely severed from him. There's no connection left, and that's what gives the object its power." She hesitated to look at the diadem. Even now, its glittering allure was enticing, reminding her of the fleeting bliss she had felt while wearing it, of abandoning her true self in favor of the cold certainty that came with Lord Voldemort. It was a truth rarely spoken. How exhilarating remorselessness could feel, like the liberating sensation of flight. Sometimes, it was intoxicating not to care. I want it gone. The firmness in her own voice startled her. I don't want it here anymore. I still, I still have dreams about it sometimes. Harry's expression turned troubled. Hermione, he paused, his words trailing off. Draco stood up, taking the sword from the table and extending the ruby-encrusted hilt toward her. There was an insistence in his posture, as if he realized she hadn't spoken to him or even glanced in his direction since their earlier conversation. As the sword sparkled between them, memories flooded back, of him standing at her bedroom door after the diadem had tried to take control, locking her in each night to keep her safe. Safe. She recalled how he had defended her to Ron, insisting, "You don't know what you're talking about." Because Draco did know. He understood precisely what the destruction of the diadem would mean for her. Yet, even with that knowledge, she couldn't bring herself to look at him. Lying in her bedroom, wrapped in the suffocating silence after she reminded him of her muggle-born status, she had felt so small and utterly alone. With a shaky grip, she wrapped her fingers around the shining hilt of the sword, avoiding Draco's gaze entirely. Instead, she turned to Harry, who offered a cautious nod of encouragement. She stepped forward to the table, the kitchen blurring around her. She forced her eyes to focus on the diadem. Was it just her imagination, or did the light dance oddly on its surface? Were the sapphires gleaming even brighter as she lifted the sword above her head, as if they sensed the impending danger? In the back of her mind, she heard a faint echo of that cold, seductive voice, the one that had whispered terrible truths, telling her she was nothing, that she had always been nothing. It promised that if she chose the right path, she could be remade into something worthy of everything. It told her she was weak, flawed, undesirable, and unworthy. How laughably foolish it seemed to care for Draco Malfoy. How pathetic to think her inferiority could simply dissolve in his eyes. How presumptuous she was, born of muggles, of worthless filth. No. The voice that resonated in her mind was her own. No. In a world that harbored hatred for who she was, there could be no room for doubt or self-loathing. Time and again, for the rest of her life, it would have to be her voice declaring her worth. With a fierce determination, she brought the sword down upon the diadem, cleaving it in two. As she did, her feet slipped on the porcelain surface and a warm, steady hand grasped her forearm, providing support. A low voice chuckled, mingling with her own laughter, echoing against the tiles. She was in the prefect's bathroom, but it felt transformed. The old sunken bath had been replaced with a clawfoot tub, casting a warm, dim light across the room. It was 6th year, well past hours, and hadn't she replayed this dream 100 times? Hadn't she spent half the year imagining Ron stumbling into the prefect's bathroom, just as she wrapped a towel around herself? Her eyes were closed, and the world felt like a sleepy blend of black and red. She wasn't sure why she was standing in the bathtub, but there had to be a reason. She found herself laughing softly, whispering, "Quiet, we have to be quiet. Someone's going to hear us." His hand glided from her forearm to her shoulder, where she still clutched the corners of the towel. His thumb teased the edge of the fabric. "No one's going to hear," he said, though it wasn't Ron's voice. Hermione kept her eyes shut, her body humming with an electric energy. "Are you sure?" she murmured as his fingertips brushed her collarbones, pulling her hair gently behind her shoulders, his movements slow yet intentional. "I'm sure," Draco replied. Then, suddenly, the floor seemed to vanish beneath her, and she was falling, plummeting into an abyss, racing toward a surface that she knew would shatter her. She jolted awake, the echo of his voice lingering in her ears. Her cheeks burned as she sat up, her breath quick and shallow. Her hands still tingled with the sensation, as if they had just unwound from his robes. Outside, the sky was pitch black. They must have returned from the lake only 4 or 5 hours ago, yet she felt wide awake. Throwing the covers aside, she climbed out of bed, a swirl of panic, frustration, and anger coursing through her. Standing at her bedroom window, which overlooked the cottage's back garden, Hermione closed her eyes. The image surfaced instantly, Draco's face in the mirror. That night, with her mind hazy from fire whiskey, she had studied his uncertain expression, wondering what he was thinking. In that fleeting moment, she had dared to consider if she had changed in his eyes, as much as he had transformed in her eyes. In truth, she had wished for it. Deep down, she had hoped for it all along. Ever since that night, she finally had her answer. "It's the Muggle National Health Service," she had said, a seemingly mundane statement that had caused him to react as if she had uttered a foul curse. The hard expression on his face had pierced through a soft, vulnerable part of her. The way he had closed his eyes, as if he could no longer bear to look at her, haunted her. Hermione slipped into the bathroom and leaned over the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. How had she let this happen? Hadn't she told herself for months not to invest in his beliefs? He was a Malfoy, after all. Yes, they had saved each other more than once, but she was acutely aware of what Draco had accepted without question for 17 years. She understood the rules she had to follow when it came to him. It was possible to trust someone with your life without trusting them with your happiness, and that was how she had approached their relationship. It felt safe to cultivate a rapport, even to appreciate the unique friendship they had forged through mutual confessions. But the dangerous part was allowing herself to truly care about his opinion of her. That was the line she had crossed. On Halloween, she had stumbled over it. She wondered if she was some sort of emotional masochist. After all, she had always found herself most drawn to Ron when he was interested in someone else. And with Draco, he had insisted they were friends, but she knew they did not share the same understanding of friendship. At Hogwarts, he had been friends with Blaise Zabini, but that connection was clearly nothing more than a convenient association for him. This, too, was a form of convenience, forced association, really, since he had nowhere else to turn. Perhaps Draco saw her as an entertaining diversion, but it was likely that he had nothing substantial invested in her. He had already made that clear. He found her attraction amusing, perhaps even a bit pathetic. The thought embarrassed him, which might explain why, after 2 weeks, he hadn't brought up what had happened on Halloween. Or maybe he was simply repulsed by it. She recalled him staring at the floor last night, looking as if he were nursing a toothache. Despite their supposed friendship, she couldn't shake the feeling that he still saw her as something less. Hermione's throat tightened, and her eyes began to sting. Panic welled up inside her, shrinking her down until she felt impossibly small. She gripped the edges of the sink until discomfort shot through her fingers, trying to erase the feelings she had experienced in her dream. Gritting her teeth, she whispered, "No." In that moment, she felt the diadem cracking under her hands and heard the distant, vengeful scream of Lord Voldemort echoing in her mind. Her reflection in the mirror showed a face filled with fury. She was done feeling scorned, lonely, and inadequate. After everything that had happened last year, she vowed never to feel that way again. She wouldn't give Draco the power to hurt her. No more dreams, no more lingering glances, and no more conversations with him unless absolutely necessary. She needed to get this foolish, naive obsession under control, if it even mattered in the grand scheme of the Horcruxes and the war. On the first day back, Draco tried to convince himself that he was imagining things. He told himself Hermione must have had a rough night's sleep. After all, they had returned from Lillimont Lake at 2:30 a.m., and she had just destroyed a Horcrux. That had to be why she looked so exhausted and why she barely spoke to him. She wasn't chatting with Potter much, either, which he took as a good sign. Surely, it was just distraction. After dinner, he finally asked, "Something up, Granger?" She replied noncommittally, flipping through the pages of Asterisk. "So you want to be someone else." Largely legal methods of wizarding identity. Asterisk. Reformation. Yet her gaze remained fixed on the top left corner of the page, unyielding. Draco recognized that when Hermione was truly absorbed in her reading, her eyes darted back and forth across the text like a painter's brush in a frenzy. Harry had lowered his own book. "Is it about the Horcrux?" he asked. "No," Hermione replied, her tone a bit sharper than usual. Harry returned to his reading. Draco mused that Harry wasn't the most observant person, but he certainly tried. That trait was something he shared with Goyle, though he'd never dare admit that to Harry for fear of a hex. Draco attempted to refocus on cleaning jinxes, befuddle your friends and defoul your household. But halfway through a description of a jinx that would transfer dust onto a friend's face, he realized he was stuck, rereading the same 6 words over and over again. He was also acutely aware that he was waiting for Harry to get up and head to bed. Harry usually turned in before Draco and Hermione, most likely to keep an eye on Ginny Weasley's dot on the Marauders map, a detail he had drunkenly shared at Halloween and, fortunately, seemed to have forgotten. Once Harry was in bed, Draco could ask Hermione again what was bothering her, and perhaps she'd give him a real answer. He knew there were things she'd confided in him that she'd never shared with Harry, a fact that brought him a sense of satisfaction. However, he barely managed to read 2 more pages of cleaning jinxes before Hermione stood up. "I'm going to bed," she announced, already ascending the stairs. Both Draco and Harry watched her leave. Do you think she's all right? Harry asked once they heard her bedroom door close upstairs. Why are you asking me? Draco replied. You've been her best friend for 7 years, haven't you? Harry shrugged, but his gaze on Draco felt too probing for Draco's comfort. She's probably just tired, he muttered, returning to his book, suddenly feeling irritable. He knew that after the next day, everything would change. It wasn't a figment of his imagination. Hermione appeared alert and well-rested, treating Potter with an air of perfect normalcy. She was focused and composed, bringing meticulously detailed notes to the library for their brainstorming session about the Christmas gala. But what she never did was look at him. When she spoke, it was with a shuttered coldness reminiscent of Severus Snape. Gradually, she began to distance herself from him entirely. In the kitchen, she stopped setting the table and humming as she worked. After dinner, instead of relaxing in the front room, she retreated to her bedroom. Draco tried to maintain an air of cool indifference, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. For the first couple of days, he managed to act normally enough, but soon, during their brainstorming sessions, he found himself reminiscing about obscure facts from Transfiguration, History of Magic, or the Grindelwald books, all in hopes of earning an impressed look from her. She never gave him one. At mealtimes, he mused aloud about arcane theoretical sub-branches of arithmancy, hoping she wouldn't be able to resist launching into an excited monologue. He spoke about foreign wizarding cultures and traditions, knowing they piqued her interest. He even shared details from his own life, revealing far more than he usually would in front of Potter. But still nothing. 5 days in, he even mentioned the weather, of all things, and Potter looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. Hermione ignored him completely, finished her orange juice, and walked into the other room. It might not have been so bad if his own mind hadn't been in disarray. Ever since that night by the lake, he struggled to rein in his imagination. Thoughts of Halloween morphed into vivid daydreams of kissing her against the library bookshelves, on the sofa in the front room, or in the kitchen beside the stove. And when she gathered her hair into a massive, frizzy bun, well, that only fueled his fantasies further. He gazed at the wispy curls at the back of her neck, imagining what it would feel like to run his fingers over her skin there. Her habit of biting her lip had become a kind of torment for him, the soft, inviting wetness of her mouth lingering in his thoughts. He fantasized about kissing her until she opened up, until she revealed what, in the name of Merlin's last rotting tooth, she was truly thinking. But as the week dragged on, a seed of suspicion took root in the back of his mind. Draco had racked his brain through countless possibilities, and he found himself at a loss. The truth was, she'd been acting strangely ever since that night by the lake, ever since their conversation when he had first allowed himself to entertain the idea of kissing her. He couldn't even recall what they had been discussing, only the rush of conflicting emotions, the shocking realization of the attraction that had been building since Halloween. She must have seen it in his expression. If not through legitimacy, then surely through her intuition, she'd understood that he desired her. And this was her response, absolute repulsion. Draco was baffled. He had thought she felt the same way about him. He had begun to take comfort in that notion. She had seemed happy to be friends, too. Who feels this way about a friend? Had he misinterpreted every single signal she had sent him? Yet, another hypothesis formed to explain the mystery. She was Hermione Granger, member of the Order, Gryffindor Prefect, founder of an elf rights society, and a group dedicated to resisting the Dark Lord. From the very beginning, that was who she had always been. And he was still the boy who had tried to murder Albus Dumbledore. He still bore the dark mark on his forearm. Sometimes last year, he would look down at the mark in the shower and wish he could just tear it off himself. He found himself doing that again now, standing in the tub downstairs, in the very spot where she had stood on Halloween. Perhaps this was the limit of Hermione's willingness to forgive. Maybe, despite all appearances, she still felt a deep-seated repulsion toward him. The idea of becoming involved had crossed a serious boundary, one so offensive to her that she had to show her true feelings. Draco thought bitterly one afternoon in the library that this might explain why she had looked so conflicted on Halloween. Perhaps when she was sober, the thought of touching him was morally repellent. He told himself that this theory had to be wrong. When had he ever misread someone so badly? And this was Hermione, the worst liar he'd ever met. He knew her, or at least he thought he did. "Are you paying attention?" Hermione asked, pulling him from his thoughts. Draco blinked. "Yes, hey leaked." "Good," she replied curtly. "Because we don't have time to waste, you know." With that, Hermione turned away, her annoyance palpable as she flipped through the Daily Prophet clippings they had gathered over the past 2 weeks. "We'll find a way in, Hermione," Potter reassured her. "We've still got a month. It'll be all right." She softened at his words, looking at Potter with a warmth that made Draco feel a sharp stab of irritation. He fought the urge to flick Potter's glasses off the bridge of his nose. "Clear your mind," a voice whispered in his head, the one that always returned in moments of high emotion. He tried, but waves of annoyance kept breaking through, shattering his focus. It took several minutes before he finally managed to slip into that blank, unfeeling state. After a long moment of silence, Potter broke it, his voice tense. "There's always the Imperious Curse." "Harry," Hermione said, looking shocked. "We're not using it to hurt anyone, are we?" Potter replied, "We just need someone on the inside. If we used it, we might not even need to get into the manor at all." Draco reclined on his pile of cushions, leaning his elbow against the sofa. Who would have guessed that Potter had it in him? "Not an option," he said firmly. "Why not?" Draco asked idly. "The Unforgivables aren't just like Wingardium Leviosa, Potter. The Imperious Curse becomes harder to maintain the farther you are from your target, the longer you exert control, and the more naturally you want them to act. Death Eaters train for years to achieve the kind of control you're suggesting." He absent-mindedly picked at one of the tassels on the sofa cushion. "We're trying to break into a ministry event, remember? Any fool in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement will recognize an amateur attempt at the Imperious. We wouldn't even make it halfway through setup and decoration." All right, Potter conceded grudgingly. "I get the point. We need something fail-safe," Hermione murmured, flipping through a thick, cracked tome that was oddly untitled. "A potion would be ideal, but I've cross-checked hundreds of potions against the capabilities of probity probes, and it looks like our only options involve really rare or expensive ingredients. Our funds are already dwindling." "How low?" Draco asked. "Well," Hermione replied, turning to Potter as if he were the one who had asked, "The galleons, mister. Weasley withdrew for us at the Burrow, our 3/4 gone on food. I've switched to my parents' bank card in case we really need to make a magical purchase, but we'd need hundreds more galleons to brew one of these potions." She shook her head. "Even then, I'd worry that the anti-intruder wards would set off alarms if we drank something that exotic or powerful." Potter sighed, slumping down in his chair. "Fantastic. No power. Let's just dig a Halloween mask out of a bin at Marks and Spencer and give that a try then." Draco snorted, but Hermione froze. Suddenly, she shot upright on her cushions. "What?" Potter asked, surprised. "Of course," she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "Yes, of course. Why didn't I think of it? They wouldn't be able to detect it. The wards wouldn't pick it up either. And no one would expect." "What?" Potter exclaimed, looking utterly bewildered. "A Halloween mask?" "No, of course not," Hermione replied, her impatience evident. "Well," Draco interjected, "please feel free to enlighten us whenever you're ready." She met his gaze, her expression suddenly brightening with enthusiasm. Draco felt a wave of relief wash over him, like a muscle finally unclenching. He realized just how much he had missed that spark in her eyes. "Do you remember," she began, "the night we spent at my house in July?" Draco's grip on the tassel of the sofa tightened instinctively. He wanted to say something witty, something that would remind her that they had shared confidences just last week. But all he managed was a simple, "Of course." "You thought there was an engorgement charm on a bear on television," she continued, her voice rising in excitement. "Well, in movies, muggles change their appearance all the time. They use something called facial prosthetics. It's a kind of makeup." Turning to Potter, she continued, "We can go to London, to a studio that specializes in this sort of thing, and get transformed into different people using muggle methods." Potter looked completely taken aback. "Hermione," he said, letting out a laugh. "Of course, Finite and Canadum won't touch muggle makeup." Both of them turned to Draco, eagerly awaiting his response. But inside, he felt a heavy weight settle in. The idea made sense. It might even be the only sensible solution. Yet the thought of stepping into the heart of Muggle London and allowing Muggles to transform him, he shuddered at the imagined disapproval of his parents. "Is it safe?" he asked warily. "Of course it is," Potter scoffed. "What do you think they're going to do, cut off your nose?" Draco didn't respond. An uncomfortable silence enveloped them, and gradually, the excitement faded from Hermione's face. She looked away, her expression closing off again. "It's all right," she said softly. "If you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to come." At first, he thought it was. It was a challenge, much like the ones Pansy used to throw his way. "Oh, you don't have to come to Hogsmeade with me. I'm sure you've got better things to do." But then he caught a glimpse of hurt on Hermione's face, and it pierced him like a pinprick to the center of his chest. His first instinct was to defend himself. All he'd asked was whether it was safe. How was he supposed to know what Muggles did? Those doctors in Muggle hospitals spent half their time chopping patients up, didn't they? But Hermione hadn't just taken his question at face value. She sensed his discomfort about mingling with Muggles, his instinctive aversion, and it hurt her. Draco struggled to comprehend this. It was the first time in a week that she had truly reacted to him. Yet, her voice had carried a tone of resignation. "It's all right," she'd said, as if reaching a foregone conclusion. Hermione Granger, the most relentless person in his life, perhaps in the entire world, who demanded more from everyone, expected nothing different from him in this moment. Then, like a flash of lightning, a memory struck him. He recalled the exact words she'd said the night they had gone to the lake, the last part of their conversation. "It's the Muggle National Health Service." And he hadn't responded. He had just sat there, trying to drown out his parents' voices, stifling his curiosity, and pushing away thoughts of kissing her. He had strained against himself, but she had no idea what turmoil was brewing inside him. All she had seen was that after she mentioned her life in the Muggle world, he had fallen silent. He must have seemed disgusted. A heavy weight stirred in Draco's stomach, squirming uncomfortably. Suddenly, a long-buried memory resurfaced. The day before his second year, when he and his father had spotted Hermione's parents in Flourish and Blots. His father had turned to Mr. Weasley with a cool sense of revulsion. "The company you keep, Weasley. And I thought your family couldn't sink any lower." Lucius hadn't even bothered to insult Hermione's family directly. All the way home, he had made snide remarks about them, about Muggles and their offspring, and Draco had eagerly agreed with every single one. Did Hermione think he still felt that way about Muggleborns? What did he truly feel? He had tried so hard to avoid the topic, desperate to escape the chaotic, unsettling emotions it stirred within him, but he couldn't dodge it forever. This was why she had shut him out. This was what she needed to know. And he needed to know too. He couldn't continue like this. What did he believe? Heat surged in Draco's head like a fever. He had been raised to value the elegance and refinement of pure blood, convinced of its innate superiority. Yet, in reality, what did that actually mean? He wasn't better at magic than Hermione. He knew half-bloods who were wealthier and more influential than his own family. What did any of it truly signify? With a wave of anger and confusion, he recalled that day in Flourish and Blots. He could have interrupted. He could have made up an excuse for them to leave, sparing Hermione and her parents from hurt. It would have been easy. Why had his father felt the need to say anything at all? If he could relive that moment, he would have guided his father out the door, found some reason to escape. Suddenly, a dizzying urge surged within him. He wanted Hermione to know that. He needed her to understand. But he didn't know how to convey it, the words tumbling out haltingly and awkwardly. "Yeah, I'll go." Hermione looked up at him, her surprise evident. You will." She gazed at him as she hadn't all week. Her eyes sparkled with the warm, sweet brown of honeyed tea, and her slightly parted lips appeared soft and inviting. It felt like drawing a breath after being underwater for 3 minutes. In that moment, Draco sensed the library slipping away from him, as if he were losing his grip on something solid. He had agreed to venture into Muggle London. He leaned back against the sofa, trying to find some comfort. "Yeah, well, I've just heard from the Chosen One himself that nobody's going to cut my nose off, so I suppose that's something." He wanted to see her smile, but her expression remained distant, even troubled. She looked almost panicked. A wave of heat coursed through Draco's body, washing over the back of his neck and the undersides of his arms. "I'll go," he thought again, trying to make the idea feel steady normal. I'll go. He was heading somewhere new. But to embark on this journey, he had to leave something behind. He had already left so much behind that he thought he would be used to the feeling, yet it was always the same. Every time felt like tying on a blindfold. Every time was like stepping into the dark,